Sometimes love doesn't end with goodbye. It begins there. They called him Station, a golden dog with eyes that seemed to hold entire lifetimes within them. Every morning, every evening, through rain, snow, and the long silence of lonely nights, he sat on the same platform, watching trains come and go. Each whistle, each echo of rolling steel was a promise, one that he refused to give up on. But before he became a legend, before travelers whispered his story as they passed through the town of Maplewood, there was simply a man and his dog. Daniel Hart wasn't a rich man. He was a carpenter, quiet and gentle, who carried grief like a shadow he never learned to let go of. His wife, Emily, was gone, taken too soon, and all he had left was his work and a heart full of empty rooms. Until one rainy evening changed everything. He found the dog shivering near the station, abandoned, hungry, with eyes that somehow looked familiar. He didn't plan to keep him, but sometimes fate doesn't ask. It just places what we need right in front of us. And from that night on, the two became inseparable. Daniel named him Station because that's where they met, and because, in some strange way, it felt like destiny. The days that followed were simple but full: shared breakfasts, walks through quiet fields, evenings by the fire. For the first time in years, Daniel laughed again. He talked to Station as if the dog understood every word. And maybe he did, because dogs don't need language to understand love. But fate has a cruel way of testing loyalty. One morning, Daniel left for a journey, a promise to return in just a few days. He packed a small bag, patted Station on the head, and said softly, "Wait for me, boy. I'll be back." The train came. The doors closed. The sound of wheels faded into the horizon. And Station waited, tail wagging, eyes full of trust, watching the tracks until the sun went down. Days passed, then weeks, then months. Daniel didn't return. But yet, the dog never left. Through snow and summer heat, through storms and silence, Station waited, not knowing that the man he loved would never come back. And that's how a story of unshakable loyalty began, one that would touch an entire town, move countless hearts, and remind the world what true devotion really means. Because sometimes love doesn't end when someone leaves. Sometimes it just waits.
Where truth meets imagination. Welcome to Facts and Fiction.
The morning trains always came with a sound that could stir the heart. A low rumble from the distance, the echo of wheels striking iron, and the hiss of steam rising against the cold air. It was a sound that meant someone was leaving, someone was coming, or sometimes that no one was coming at all. The small town of Maplewood sat on the edge of nowhere, where fog rolled down from the hills and lingered over the tracks until late morning. The station itself was modest: a wooden bench, a ticket counter that was rarely manned, and a clock that had stopped working 2 years ago, but still hung proudly above the platform. That's where people first noticed the dog. He was a scruffy, golden-furred mutt, medium-sized, with alert brown eyes that seemed to search every passing train. No collar, no tag. His coat was thick but unkempt, and one of his ears drooped slightly, giving him a look both curious and sad. At first, people thought he was just another stray wandering for scraps. But day after day, he returned to the same bench on the platform, always around the same time. The old station master, Mr. Grant, was the first to take real notice. "That one's got purpose," he told anyone who'd listen, leaning on his broom as the morning train thundered by. "You can tell. He's not here for food. He's waiting for somebody. And indeed he was. Across town, in a small white house with blue shutters, lived a man named Daniel Hart. A carpenter by trade, Daniel was known for two things: his kindness and his silence. After his wife passed away 5 years earlier, Daniel had lived alone, keeping mostly to himself. He worked at the old mill on the river, returned home in the evenings, and every Sunday he visited the station. He had a reason. His wife Emily had always loved trains. When she was alive, the two of them would come to the station every weekend just to watch them pass by. "Each one is a promise," she used to say, smiling as the carriages blurred past. "Someone is coming home. Someone is returning." After she was gone, Daniel kept the ritual alive. Every Sunday, he'd come and sit on the bench where they used to sit together, a bouquet of wildflowers resting beside him. He'd watch the trains, sometimes whispering to her, as if she were sitting there still. And that's where the dog found him. It was a rainy evening when Daniel first saw the creature. The man was sitting beneath the station roof, listening to the rhythm of the rain on the platform. A faint whimper broke through the sound. He looked down to find the dog, soaked, shivering, and thin as a shadow, standing just a few feet away, staring up at him with those deep, searching eyes. "Well, where'd you come from?" Daniel murmured. The dog took a hesitant step forward. Daniel reached into his coat pocket, pulled out half a sandwich from his lunch pail, and held it out. The dog sniffed the air, then gently took it from his hand before retreating a few steps back. "Didn't expect company," Daniel said softly. The next Sunday, the dog was there again. Then again the next. Each week, it came earlier, staying longer, until eventually it didn't leave at all. Soon, the townspeople began to notice that the man and the dog were always together. The two walked side by side down the street every morning, Daniel heading to work, the dog trotting faithfully beside him. When Daniel hammered nails into oak beams or planed wood smooth, the dog would lie nearby, watching, tail occasionally thumping against the sawdust-covered floor. The men at the mill started calling him Station, because that's where he had first appeared. Daniel liked the name. Every evening, after work, they'd walk back to the station and sit for a while, watching the trains come and go. It became their quiet ritual. A man and his dog, waiting not for someone to arrive, but simply for the peace that came with the waiting itself. Then one afternoon, a stranger arrived at the station. She was a young woman with tired eyes and a suitcase that had seen better days. Her train was delayed, and she sat on the far bench, nervously glancing at her watch. Station trotted up to her curiously, wagging his tail. "Hello there," she said, surprised, patting his head. "You here alone?" Daniel smiled from the other bench. "He's never really alone. Whole town looks after him now." The woman smiled faintly. "Wish I had that kind of company." "Where you headed?" Daniel asked. She hesitated. "Don't really know yet." That night, after she boarded her train, Daniel stayed on the platform longer than usual. Station sat beside him, head tilted, as if sensing something unspoken. Daniel sighed, rubbing the dog's fur. She reminded me of Emily," he said softly. "That same lost look, like she was searching for somewhere she belonged." Station rested his head on Daniel's knee. The stars came out one by one, faint and flickering in the misty sky. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the faraway hum of another train in the distance. He didn't know it yet, but that quiet night marked the beginning of everything that was to come.
Winter arrived early that year. The mornings in Maplewood grew pale and breathless, the kind where frost clung to every window pane, and the mist hung so thick you could almost taste it. Daniel started lighting the stove before dawn, feeding the dog half of whatever he made for breakfast. Station had grown stronger, his fur a golden halo against the snow. He followed Daniel everywhere, to the mill, to the market, to the station every Sunday. The townsfolk had come to see them as inseparable. Children waved whenever they saw the pair. "There's Mr. Hart and his dog," they'd shout. Even the grumpy old postmaster cracked a smile when Station bounded past his counter. Yet beneath that quiet life, there was something in Daniel's eyes that never quite faded, a longing that seemed to echo the very sound of the trains that came and went. Sometimes, in the evenings, Daniel would talk to Station as if he understood every word. "You know, Emily would have loved you," he'd murmur, tossing a stick into the snow. "She always wanted a dog. Used to say they can sense souls better than people." Station would fetch the stick, tail wagging furiously, eyes gleaming in the orange light of the setting sun. One Sunday evening, Daniel brought something special to the station, a small wooden box he'd crafted himself. It was smooth and carved with tiny patterns of leaves and waves, his late wife's favorite designs. Inside, he placed a single photograph, Emily smiling beneath a cherry tree, hair wind-tossed, eyes bright. He set the box beside the bench where they always sat. "Thought you might like to rest here too," he whispered. Station sat beside him, head resting on Daniel's leg as another train roared by. Then came the letter. It arrived on a gray morning in early February, brought by the postman who tapped on Daniel's workshop door. Daniel wiped his hands on his apron and took it, squinting at the faded handwriting. It was from his brother, Samuel, whom he hadn't spoken to in years. The letter was short. "Danny, the old man's sick. Doesn't have much time. Come if you can." Daniel stood still for a long while after reading it. His father had never forgiven him for leaving the family farm to marry Emily. Their last words had been sharp and bitter. But now there was no anger left in his heart, only a quiet ache. That evening he packed a small bag and looked down at Station, who watched with tilted head and bright, trusting eyes. "I'll be back in a few days," Daniel said softly. "You stay here, boy. You know the station better than anyone." Station wagged his tail but didn't understand. Daniel left a bowl of food and water by the bench at the station. He kneeled, holding the dog's face in both hands. "Wait for me, all right? I'll be back soon." Station licked his hand. The next morning, Daniel boarded the early train, the one that came before the sunrise, its headlights cutting through the fog like two watchful eyes. Station ran alongside it for as long as his paws could carry him, barking, tail streaming behind him. The train disappeared into the distance, and the sound faded, swallowed by the hills. And so the waiting began. Every day, Station came to the station at the same time, sitting by the bench where Daniel had last kneeled. He waited through the morning, through the noon trains, and sometimes until dusk, when the platform lights flickered on and the cold crept into his bones. At first, people thought it was sweet. "Daniel's dog," they'd say, smiling. "He'll come back soon." But the days turned to weeks, then months, and Daniel did not return. Some said he'd fallen ill like his father. Others whispered of an accident. No one really knew. News traveled slow in those days, and the world beyond Maplewood seemed far away. Still, Station waited. Rain or shine, frost or thunder, he was there. The station master tried to coax him home more than once, offering food or shelter, but the dog refused to leave the platform. He'd eat what was given, then return to his spot by the bench, eyes fixed down the tracks. The children stopped calling him Station.
They started calling him the Watcher. The townsfolk built a small wooden shelter for him under the eaves where he could rest when the snow grew heavy. Someone even brought him a blanket. But he never slept until the last train of the night had come and gone. Only then would he curl up beside the bench and close his eyes. As the seasons turned, Station became something of a legend. Travelers who passed through Maplewood would hear the story. "There's a dog who waits for his master," they'd say. "Every day, every train." Some would pause to take pictures or leave scraps of food, touched by the sight. But for Station, there was no story, only waiting. And somewhere, far beyond the hills and towns, Daniel was lying in a small hospital bed, his breath shallow, the sound of distant trains faint through the open window. He had meant to return, truly he had. But the fever came fast, and his strength faded before he could make the journey home. On his final day, as the nurse tried to ease his pain, Daniel whispered just one thing, barely audible but clear. "Tell him I'll be back. Tell Station I'll come home." No message was ever sent. Back in Maplewood, spring came again, painting the station in soft green light. Wildflowers grew along the tracks, and the morning trains returned to their steady rhythm. Station's muzzle had started to gray, his pace a little slower, but his eyes, those searching, patient eyes, never lost their light. Every morning he'd perk up at the first rumble from the distance, tail wagging, ears alert. Each train that stopped brought faces he didn't know, but he searched them all the same. Every coat, every voice, every step. One evening, a small boy approached him with a biscuit in his hand. "Hey, doggy, who are you waiting for?" Station blinked, tilted his head, and stared down the empty tracks where the sun was setting in streaks of red and gold. The boy followed his gaze. "You think he's coming soon?" Station wagged his tail once. And so the dog kept waiting, not because he understood time or loss, but because somewhere deep inside, hope had taken root. Hope that one day that familiar scent, that familiar voice would return through the smoke and clatter of the train that always came and always left. The years rolled on and Maplewood changed. The old mill closed, new faces came and went, and the world grew busier. But at the heart of it all, by the weathered wooden bench beneath the broken clock, the golden dog kept his silent vigil. He had forgotten the sound of his master's voice, but not the feeling it carried. And as night fell once again, the station lights flickered softly, catching the glint of his eyes that still searched, still waited. Some said it was loyalty, others said it was love, but those who truly watched him knew it was both.